Hello again. So today I'm going to talk about the second stage of my game development journey. You see, I was a massively multiplayer online role-playing game developer before Morpigs were a thing. It was in the world of multi-user dungeons, or MUDs, which are text-based adventure games, but online, and normally accessed with a telnet program. There were telnet programs specifically for MUDs that made it easier to run shortcut commands and execute commands automatically in response to text that you see on the screen. Tintin was one of the first major ones, and that later influenced things like WinTin and a bunch of similar derivatives and really advanced alternatives. Now, I discovered MUDs in the mid 1990s when I first got access to the University of Toledo computer labs, and I played the heck out of them, to distraction. My main MUD became Duras, Land of Bloodlust, a PvP game based on good versus evil wars, where orcs, ogres, and trolls were fighting against elves, humans, and gnomes. And there was a lot of large group player versus player combat, and there were things like raids to the territories of the enemy, and a lot of strategy around taking down the enemy. Sometimes it became just a giant pile-on fight where you'd bring 100 people to kill one person, but some of the more interesting fights were really pretty epic, and it was all just 16 colors of text. Um, so these games, I played them for years, and later EverQuest came out, and the number of people playing mods started to drop drastically. Interestingly enough, the people who were behind some of the main MUD code bases, Daiku, they actually accused EverQuest of stealing their code to build EverQuest because despite the graphics, the actual gameplay and text and interactions were so similar in EverQuest to a lot of the Daiku code based MUDs out there in the world. Well, after playing for a few years, I got into programming, and my very first MUD was called Illustrium Arcana. And it was based on a code base, I think it was Envy, it might have been Ultra Envy, they sort of run together at this point. But it was also a PvP based game with a very heavy magic focus with a bunch of different wizard and spellcasting classes. Well, I just jumped into the code base with basically a hatchet, started just changing everything, modifying things. Really had no idea what I was doing, although I knew how to code and had learned C programming. I really wasn't familiar with the code I was working on, so it was a bit of a buggy disaster. I mean, it was always crashing, and it was pretty frustrating at times, and it never really caught on. There were maybe at peak times maybe a dozen players, and I was building this with my roommate at the time. And it was really kind of a wild ride, and I learned a lot, but it never really went anywhere. But after that, I joined a MUD which was a derivative of Duras Land of Bloodlust called Basternae. And they had taken the code base of Duras because the people running Duras didn't want to maintain it, didn't have the patience to keep up with it. So they gave some people permission to use the code base in a different game. And for a few years they ran that. And then it came a time where the people who originally ran Duras wanted to run it again. And they told the people who were borrowing the code that they had to shut down. And that's where my big hardcore project came in. So the people who were running Basternae didn't want to shut it down because they had a lot of custom content. They had a big loyal player base. They really had put a lot of work into it. And I had joined the admin team of Basternae about a month earlier, just doing some minor changes, some code maintenance, and that sort of thing. Well, when this news of needing to shut down came in, I thought about it for a bit and came up with the crazy suggestion, well, we still have all of our content. Why don't we just build our own engine to run it? Kind of reverse engineer based on our area, our zone format, our levels, the game that would run it. This was a very insane idea, but I was young and had a lot of time on my hands. And so I just started adapting the closest code base I could find, which was, I think, Greed MUD, or one of those sort of Daiku derivative again. So it had a lot of the similar core stuff. So it wasn't that hard to adapt to because they had things like similar formats for monsters and items and different like flags you could set on things to control how they behaved. So after I'm not sure how long exactly, but it took somewhere between 3 and 6 months to get it working well enough and load some areas from the old game. And it was definitely not everything worked right. It might be able to load monsters, but it certainly didn't have all the special abilities that those monsters should have, and all of the different spells people could cast. But over time, it gradually became a usable game. Um, I worked on it a lot, and I eventually got to a point of burnout and left it in the hands of the other admins, who then continued to grow and change the game engine. And I think at peak, it probably had about 175 players online at once on like a Friday or Saturday night. And because it was a text-based game and didn't have graphics, it could have supported far more. I'm sure it would have ran just fine with 1,000 players. And it was on a pretty hefty server, something like a 200 megahertz Pentium or something equivalent, maybe a 300 megahertz Pentium 2 toward the end. But it was for doing a text adventure game. It was like a beast of a server, and it really was never very taxed. Didn't need very much memory, and it was very interesting. So after a year or two later, I popped back in and tried to work on this Basternae 2 MUD a bit more, but it really never felt right. It had changed enough, and people had their own ideas of how it should run, so I was just kind of in the way. But I still wanted to work on the code, and originally it's a code base that I had adapted in the first place. So I just started working on the code, kind of in my spare time for fun, and porting it from C++ to, or just raw C really, to C sharp, because at the time I was learning C sharp. I wasn't working at the time. I'd left a very terrible, abusive job that I might describe in another video. But so as part of trying to learn C sharp better, I tried to port this MUD engine. And there are years and years of blog entries on my website about this that you could read up if you want to. I'll put a link in the description. But I was able to port it to C sharp. It was a working MUD engine. I didn't really have the time or motivation to turn it into a real game that people played, but it's certainly, over the years, I put it up for short periods of time, and it was pretty interesting. It had all of its own editing tools and like graphical maps and just a lot of extra detail that a modern MUD would have. And I released this code base, the C Sharp MUD code base, as the ModernMUD code base, which is available on my GitHub. It's not super well documented, but it does function, and it's a working MUD in C Sharp. And this was a very fun project that I just learned a lot from, and I just have tons of experience programming in both C and C Sharp based on my experience in MUDs. And some of the players were real fanatics about it. They really enjoyed it. They played the heck out of it, and I still hear from them now again. And because they're super enthusiastic, and I was kind of like a kind of famous, MUD famous back in the day because I worked on the game they all played. So I'm sure some of the old players of Basternae might find their way to this channel and some of the games I'm going to be writing here. My current project, Into the Inferno, which I've done a little bit of demo videos from, is very much a spiritual successor to Basternae, and the way combat works and the way some of the magic system and things like that are very much similar to how I used to write MUD code. And certainly, like, this stuff has been rattling around in my head for ages and ages, and it's influenced very strongly this game I'm working on now. So I think that if the old Basternae players were to find their way to this new game when I release it, I really think genuinely think they'd enjoy it and maybe even ask for more. But of course, time will tell, and I hope some of them will join me in this journey. But yeah, MUDs were so fascinating because they were the cutting edge online game that anybody could play for free and anybody could work on. You needed to find a server, you needed to find hosting, and pretty much anybody with a college shell account in the 90s could run one. It was kind of a problem because the people administering servers would find all kinds of applications running on them and have to lock them down. But it was a very accessible way to do game development and to participate in the development of the games that you enjoyed because the people were just regular people you could talk to working on them. And if you could point out bugs, you could give them suggestions, you could even sometimes join in and build areas for games. For instance, I wrote a couple of zones, like a goblin hometown, some city for trolls, a bunch of different things, and um, it was a mix of writing a book and writing and doing a bunch of math and numbers. It's really very much like writing a Dungeons and Dragons module or writing an adventure for that. So it was a very fun time in my life, and I didn't make a single penny from it because there was a problem with the world of MUDs in general, both good and bad, in that any code that was derived from this Daiku code base, which was probably 80% of the MUDs in the world, maybe more, were expressly forbidden from ever making any money, ever charging for their games. So these things could not go professional even if they wanted to, even if people wanted to pay for them. It just wasn't an option unless you wrote a game system from scratch, which at the time was very, very difficult. Now it's pretty a whole lot easier, a whole lot faster because dev tools are better, languages are better. There are a lot of libraries that make things so much easier. Um, yeah, it was an interesting world, and if you were in it, if you know, you know. And nowadays they do still exist, but it's just not the same. And it's not that cutting edge new adventure thing like you're discovering something that has never existed before. Uh, and I really enjoyed that, and it's definitely influencing the game I'm working on now. So let me know in the comments if you've played MUDs, if maybe you've played even Basternae, if you found your way here through maybe my blog, which had all the old Basternae code on it. But yeah, I'd love to hear if other people had experience with MUDs and how it influenced your life. Um, but yeah, it was fun stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll speak with you next time.